Well, thank you all very much for coming. I have to tell you, this is about the easiest talk that I ever give because all I have to do is brag about your work. But what I like to do at the end of each year is stop and reflect a little bit on the accomplishments of the organization. And so today, what I'd really like to do is highlight what I think are some of the incredible achievements of this group. I have no disclosures, obviously, except that I'm quite passionate about the Texas Heart Institute. So most of you are aware that we spent a reasonable amount of time in this last academic year working with a national branding company called Edelman. And Edelman really helped look back at the Texas Heart Institute and what we have done over the last 60 years, help us think about where we are today, but even more importantly, help us begin to imagine what the future of THI looks like. And as part of that long exercise with Edelman, we came up with a new vision, a new mission, and we added a couple of values to the values that we have talked about for the last couple of years. Our new vision is bringing the future of cardiovascular health to life. And our mission is to improve cardiovascular health today through trailblazing research, thought leadership, education, and patient care. And the two values that we added, we thought really were representative of the spirit, of the ethos of the Texas Heart Institute. And that's that we're a curious group and that we're pioneering. And I think that you'll see both of those themes woven into particularly our research, the research part of my talk. Now, to go along with the concept of being a pioneering organization, this organization that we're going to be looking to sort of solidify over the next decade, there are some strategic imperatives. And at the risk of reading to you, I think a couple of these are really important to highlight. One is we want to create the Texas Heart Institute experience. No matter if you're a patient, if you're someone that we work with in the research domain, our collaborators, people who are thinking about coming here to train, there's an experience that we want to create for all of those people. It's a professional, pioneering, curious, innovative kind of spirit that really defines the Texas Heart Institute. We're going to be unwavering in our focus on quality and impact. We plan to reestablish THI on a national and international stage and be recognized for cardiovascular excellence and our programs of distinction. We're going to recruit outstanding physicians and scientists. We're going to provide training that's grounded in 60 years of our institute's values. And finally, we want to ensure that the people who work with us have professional lives that are easier and more fulfilling. And to that end, I'd like to just thank our HR group, who has really been instrumental in focusing us in on our opportunities around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Most of you will remember taking a survey late last year where we tried to understand where we are today with regards to these important concepts. And we've now begun developing a strategy to roll out ways for all of us to be better in this space. And Janelle Ng and her team are putting together an advisory council, and we're going to start doing some training on DEIB. So I want to now to shift focus and begin thinking with you a little bit about where we are and the advances that we've made in the clinical research and education domains. As most of you are well aware, there's an employed practice of the Texas Heart Institute that came together in 2020. This group is continuing to grow, as I'll show you in just a minute, but these are the faces of the employed practice of THI, and you can see the specialties shown on the right side of the slide. And we're not done yet. We have important and impressive plans to continue growing this practice. In fact, the THI board has approved the addition of another 20 physicians to the practice over the next 4 to 5 years. And as I mentioned, we're growing. And if you look back just at the last academic year, the physicians that we've added are at the top left of this slide, Doctors Livesay, Hallman, and Cozart, who are three of the cardiac surgeons at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center, joined our practice. And we successfully recruited Nikos Diakos, Jorge Escobar to the practice, and Robert Paisley, who's one of the EP fellows who's finishing in June, will be joining the practice as well. And as this group has continued to grow, we are seeing important increases in the number of new patients that are running through the clinic and in the kinds of imaging procedures that we're performing, and that's shown in the graph on the right. We're in fact projecting more than a 10% growth in the new patients that we're going to see this fiscal year, and an overall growth in patient volumes that exceeds 8%. This is outstanding growth by almost any standard in clinical medicine today. We also have a new facility, and if you haven't had the chance to get up to the 26th floor of the Fannin Tower, we welcome you up there. It's really a spectacular new clinic space. We opened it up to start seeing patients in December of last year. Our physician offices are now housed over there, but we went from, I think, 8 exam rooms to 18. We now have 5 echo labs in our clinic space, a space for vascular imaging and vascular procedures. We have in-office CT, PET CT and SPECT, as well as a phlebotomy and chest x-ray station. And we're transitioning our electronic health record to the Epic system. And we hope to have that finished by the end of this calendar year. And you can see that the aesthetic of this space fits well with the kinds of care that we provide at the Texas Heart Institute Center for Cardiovascular Care. You might look at that name and say, that's not a name that I recognize, but as part of that branding exercise that we went through with Edelman, we changed the name of the practice from the Texas Heart Medical Group to the Texas Heart Institute Center for Cardiovascular Care. And along with Juan Reyes and Emerson Perrin and others in the practice who are driving our quality initiative, I think that we have some real preliminary data to suggest that that practice is performing at a very high level. Dr. Perrin and Juan took a look at the number of patients coming through our practice with coronary disease who were being treated with statins, not just to see if they were taking a statin, but have we actually achieved the goals of lowering cholesterol, which is to get the LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol down under 70 milligrams per deciliter. And in the practice, we were performing above the 90th percentile for that metric in that patient population. So we're moving beyond these traditional kinds of metrics. Does a patient with coronary disease, are they treated with a statin? Are they on a beta blocker? Are they treated with aspirin? But we're actually looking now beyond process to performance. And I think that's going to be an important transition, not just for the THI-CCC, but for all of Texas Heart Institute and for Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center. We also started into the MIPS program this year, and I'm happy to report that the practice actually had a small financial upside with the MIPS program, which is a CMS-driven program that looks at quality of care provided. And if you look at how our patients feel about coming to see us in the employed practice, you can see the patient satisfaction scores on the right side of the slide and realize that on the y-axis, this is truncated at 70%. And appreciate that most of the scores that we're seeing exceed the 90th percentile. This is top box rating. And especially as it relates to how people feel about the physicians and whether they would recommend the practice to their friends or their family members, that exceeds the 95th percentile. We also had some retirements from the practice this year. Roberto Lushanowski decided to step away from the practice. Roberto joined the medical staff at Baylor St. Luke's in 1970. Roberto published 43 papers, including 2 very highly cited papers where he described aneurysms of the left ventricle and the surgical management of Prinzmetal's angina. Both of those had almost 100 citations. And beyond Dr. Lufshanowski's scientific contributions. I think all of us who were touched by Dr. Lufshanowski recognized that he really was a phenomenal physician, and it's been incredible to have his patients reach out and talk about the relationship, the deep personal relationship that they had with Dr. Lufshanowski. But he was a wonderful colleague and a wonderful friend, and we're happy that he intermittently still joins us for events. And I've been fortunate to be able to speak with him on the phone following his retirement. This is a picture of him with his family at his retirement event. I also wanted to highlight for you that Dr. Paolo Angelini is stepping aside from practice at THI-CCC, and Dr. Angelini obtained his medical degree at the University of Milan. He did his clinical cardiology at Baylor, and then did a research fellowship here at Baylor at St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital. And Dr. Angelini's scientific contributions are really impressive. He is an internationally recognized expert in the field of coronary artery anomalies. He also has a deep, passionate interest in Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. But Dr. Angelini has published over 240 papers, is a very highly cited clinician investigator, and has some of his most highly cited papers are shown in the bullet points here in the slide. But you can see he wrote a paper, Coronary Anomalies, the Incidence, Pathophysiology, and Clinical Relevance, which has been cited in excess of 600 times. So Paulo has been a remarkable friend and a remarkable colleague, and we're pleased that he will continue working on his scientific endeavors through THI. And I don't want to limit my comments only to the employed physicians of Texas Heart Institute, but to think also about some of our other colleagues who are on the professional staff. And I think most of you are aware that Dr. Ken Liao is a national leader in the field of robotic cardiac surgery. I believe that he's now performed close to 500 of these procedures. And what I'm showing you on the left side of this slide is a patient that I sent to Dr. Liao for robotic surgery. This was a young man who was actually such a skilled runner that he was in the Olympic qualifiers. And he began to develop breathlessness, went to another hospital and was found to have a mass on his tricuspid valve. And it's actually shown on the left side of the slide. He had just a papillary fibroelastoma. And it turned out that this thing was large enough that it was sort of falling into the orifice of his tricuspid valve and obstructing blood flow. And Dr. Liao went in with a robot and resected this, and this gentleman's symptoms have resolved. And I also want to highlight Dr. Jennifer Cozart, who's doing some really interesting, innovative work with the convergent procedure. Many of you know that we've gotten very facile at treating atrial fibrillation by putting burn marks inside the heart to try to prevent atrial fibrillation from occurring and atrial fibrillation from recurring. Dr. Cozart, with some of her colleagues, have developed and worked on a procedure called the convergent procedure, which is done laparoscopically. You can see that how she enters the chest in the cartoons on the left side of the slide here, and has an instrument that's able to place burns on the outside, on the back of the left atrium. And she's also able to clip the left atrial appendage, which is where clots form in atrial fibrillation and can cause strokes. Following this surgical procedure, then, these patients come back several weeks later for a quick touch-up from the endocardial side by an electrophysiologist. But the important part of this is shown here in these data elements here in the middle of the slide. And it turns out that this kind of approach, at least in the trial that was published in Circulation, Arrhythmia and Electrophysiology, is that the patients who underwent the convergent procedure had a statistically significant better outcome. They had less atrial fibrillation, they needed less antiarrhythmic drugs than using simple endovascular and endocardial ablation techniques in isolation. So I think Jennifer has done a very nice job at building the convergent patient population, and we look forward to supporting her with this going forward. I also want to highlight something that maybe some of you in the audience and some of you who are watching today are unaware of, and that is the severity of illness of patients cared for at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center is the third highest in the United States. It's third only to the Cleveland Clinic and Keck Hospital, which is the academic hospital affiliated with the University of Southern California. But the third highest case mix index is Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center. And I wanted to just give you another example of a patient that I saw, and I looped Emerson Perrin into this. And I'm hopeful that these slides will play for us. Let me see if I can get them to do that. There we go. So this was somebody who reached out by email, and I've laughed with Emerson about this many times and said, you know, these are emails that I typically don't spend a lot of time thinking about, because oftentimes they're sending emails to multiple different cardiovascular programs. But this was a lady who was down in Brazil who had a left circumflex coronary artery to coronary sinus fistula. And what I think you'll be able to appreciate over here, if I can show you this, is this is her left circumflex coronary artery. It's about, I don't know, 10 times the normal size. And what Emerson and 3 other interventional cardiologists were able to do was put a catheter in the circumflex coronary, run a wire through that coronary, then run another catheter up to the coronary sinus, put a lasso through there, grab the wire, and create a monorail. And then over that monorail through the coronary sinus, put an Amplatzer device in that occluded a large part of the blood flow through this anomalous large coronary artery. And interestingly, this woman who had migraine headaches for a large part of her life said, all of a sudden, as soon as that catheter was put in, my headaches went away. And the anticipation is that over time, this thing will begin to shrink down. I think this is a great example of the collaborative nature of Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center and how we are taking on some of the most challenging, difficult cases across the world and solving them through innovation. And through the leadership of Juan Carlos Plana, the organization has not lost sight on the importance of quality. And you all are aware that we have been ranked as a leading cardiovascular center in U.S. News and World Report since the rankings began. But we got another recognition this year, which I think is worth mentioning, from the American College of Cardiology. Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center and the Texas Heart Institute were recognized as a heart care center of national distinction for excellence in quality. And the criteria to achieve that award are shown down at the bottom of this. But I think it highlights the laser focus that we've had on ensuring that our patients are exposed to the highest quality cardiovascular care that's possible. What I'd like to do now is turn and highlight some of the remarkable research that's gone on at THI over the past year. And we've often been asked, we can see all of these research programs that you have, are there themes to them? And so we paused and stopped to think about this. And in fact, I think that there are 5 or 6 different kinds of themes of research that we do at THI. Because of Bud Frazier and his interests in transplantation and mechanical circulatory support, we have a long-standing history and interest in coming up with innovative ways to manage the failing heart. In addition, THI is well known for internationally our focus on interventional cardiology solutions. And so there's groups of and teams of scientists and clinicians who work together in that space. Dr. Darren Woodside and Peter Vanderslice have formed the Molecular Cardiology Research Lab doing drug development. And we also have some work going on with cardiac myocyte renewal, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We have 2 labs who were primarily focused on arrhythmias, and I'll show you some of the really interesting work that's been done in the last year in that space. And then David Fish has been interested in valvular heart disease. And then Stephanie Coulter and her team have been working on issues related to women's health and population health-based approaches to managing illness. And then we have a series of core laboratories shown over on the right. But there are 3 teams that are shown in green, and these are areas that we plan to build in the next academic year. We're making important investments to develop a health data sciences approach. And Matt Seeger, who was kind enough to introduce me earlier, has been critical in our thinking about how to grow this group. We're also working on recruiting an individual who's very passionate about understanding the basic science of structural and congenital heart disease. And we also think that we need to add biostatisticians to the organization to help support our research initiatives. So what I'd like to do now is turn and think a little bit about how some of these groups actually intersect and work together. And I wanted to show you a little bit of work that's gone on with regards to device development and how that intersects with the large animal lab downstairs. Many of you are aware that we have spent the last decade working with Vivacor to develop a new total artificial heart that's a centrifugal flow pump. It actually has been designed in a way that it makes it unlikely to ever wear out because there are no bearings in this device. This device has been tested in a series of animals, and you can see on the right side of this slide, this is a cow who does not have a heart. This cow is being supported with one of theen machines. And the device is shown down here just prior to implantation. Interestingly, this device has now been miniaturized, and Dr. Elglot and his team earlier this week put one of these devices that's been miniaturized into a sheep. And it's the thought that it's been miniaturized to the point that this could support children who have heart failure as well. Yixin Wang upstairs, who runs the ID lab, is developing a new smaller ventricular assist device for pediatric patients, and with the concept that this might also be beneficial in patients who have congenital heart disease and have misshapen or unusually small ventricles. And she and Dr. Frazier have done a remarkable job at getting peer-reviewed funding. This lab is probably now one of the best funded labs at THI with 3 federally funded grants. And just a little bit more work that's gone on downstairs in the large animal lab. And there's so much that's happening down there, so much innovation and such great collaborations with industry partners. But up on the left side of this slide, this yellow looking ventricle with what looks like blood inside of it, turns out that there's a company who's interested in developing 3D printed scaffolding with the idea that we may be able to someday manufacture organs with this kind of approach. Down here in the middle on the left is a new ventricular assist device that's been developed in Mexico that's being tested in sheep in the lab. Up here, this sort of interesting looking contraption is a new approach that we're working on with a company to transport hearts for transplantation. It's a cold storage solution. So in the basement, we've been doing sheep heart transplants. And then a couple of other devices, including a device that Emerson Perrin is working on to inject stem cells into the human heart. So I want to turn now to some of the work that's being done in a molecular cardiology lab and the myocyte renewal lab. And a lot of this work has been driven by Jim Martin, who's interested in understanding the molecular signaling that makes heart cells stop dividing. And he's come up with some really interesting strategies to turn that signal off so that cells inside the heart can begin to replicate again. That actually has been translated into some of this mouse work that's shown over here, sorry, on the left. And I guess my movie's not playing. Oh yeah, it does play a little bit. So they actually have developed an ischemia model in the hind limb of mice and then begun to grow new blood vessels to revascularize the lower limbs. And you can see the mouse on the right has had that gene therapy treatment. The mouse on the left has not. But this is really a fascinating, except if you're the mouse on the left, it's not that fascinating. But the mouse on the right is very happy that he actually got the gene therapy. And I want to highlight another laboratory that I think has done remarkable work in the last year, and that's the work of the Regenerative Medicine group. And that's run by Camilla Hochman-Mendez. And this is some work that's gone on at THI for several years, this idea that you could decellularize a heart, wash off the cells with a detergent, and then repopulate that heart with healthy stem cells. It's really an interesting concept, and they've gotten these hearts to the point where they can begin to beat. But there's two aspects of this that I think are critical. It was just this week that Dr. Hochman Mendez found out that she was awarded a very nice NIH grant. She received her first R01, and she's been recognized as an NHLBI early stage investigator, which I think is just terrific. The other thing that's really fascinating about this laboratory is that it's almost entirely female scientists. In fact, the last time I looked at a picture of the lab, it's 90% women. And I'm so proud of this lab for the work that they're doing. I think it's absolutely incredible. So I wanted to turn now for a second and think a little bit about some of the EP research and innovation that's going on. And I hope, by the way, I know I'm skipping over some of you who are doing really fascinating work, but I wanted to just highlight a few things. But this is some work that Mehdi Razavi and his laboratory are doing, where they have identified electroconductive hydrogels that can be injected into the veins of the heart. They don't obstruct blood flow, and they can be used as a pacemaker. So you could actually more normally pace the heart as opposed to putting just simple leads into the heart. But there's also some potential that this approach may be antiarrhythmic, because you're actually not asking the electricity to go in circuitous paths around scar. So I think this is a really interesting and innovative approach. And Mehdi texted me today, and the paper that he's written about this is under review at Nature. And then I wanted to highlight two other really important observations that have occurred this year at THI. And I love this idea of following the science. And I think Emerson Perrin's DREAM trial is a great example of this. Most of you know that Dr. Perrin's research and clinical interests have been focused on clinical stem cell therapy. And earlier this year, the DREAM-HF trial was published. DREAM-HF was a multi-center trial, a large randomized controlled clinical trial of stem cells versus placebo in patients with heart failure. And interestingly, if you look at the primary endpoint of that trial, the primary endpoint was negative. But Emerson Perrin and his team learned something much more important than that. He actually was able to understand, by taking a look at subgroups in the DREAM-HF trial, that the people who derived benefit in DREAM-HF were the people who had baseline markers of elevated inflammation. And I think it gave that team insights about mechanism, and it informed them for the next clinical trial. But if you look at what they found, was that it was really the groups of patients that had no inflammation or more inflammation in their heart that derived the greatest benefit from stem cells. And there is actually a rationale for that. You know, we've tried using anti-inflammatory approaches in heart failure in the past, but we're targeting one pathway. And what Dr. Perrin is doing is putting in factories in these stem cells that are producing a variety of different anti-inflammatory properties. And I think that actually he may have really uncovered some of the future for the use of cardiovascular stem cell therapies. The other story that I think is really interesting is the work that's come out of the Molecular Cardiology Research Lab with Drs. Vanderslice and Woodside. You'll know that some of the things that that team had been working on were to develop molecules that would get cells to stick inside organs. And that idea was that we could use that kind of approach to increase the benefit of stem cell therapies. Through their work, they were able to derive a molecule that allowed immune cells to begin sticking to targets. And you could imagine that if you could get the immune system to stick to a target, you could enhance the efficacy of vaccines, and that's a potential for this. But the other really interesting and untapped potential for this is that you could potentially use it for cancer immunotherapy, where we're training your own immune system to attack tumors. And they outsourced this, they licensed this out to a startup company called Seven Hills Pharma, but Seven Hills Pharma was notified 2 weeks ago that they just received a $13 million grant from the state of Texas to use the therapy that was developed by our team in a group of patients that has resistant melanoma. So again, it's this idea of, they didn't start, I don't think that, Peter, maybe you could correct me, but I don't think you started off thinking this is going to be a cancer therapy, but you followed the science. And I think this is really a wonderful part of the way that THI holistically views the approaches that we take and follows the science to look for all of the applications. We've got remarkably innovative people who are our investigators. The National Academy of Inventors, amongst its roster, there are 5 THI investigators that are shown here. And if you look proportionately, we have the highest proportion at TMC, so I'm claiming that to be sure. And I also want to just highlight how proud we all are of our scientists and our research teams. In the last year, they increased the number of grants that they submitted by 25%. And the total funding amount for those grants was over $30 million. And we've actually begun to see some of the return on those increased numbers of submissions. Here were 5 awards that were given out last year, which are very important in supporting some of the work that I've just described to you. And even more exciting is in January, we received word that 8 grants that were submitted to federal funding agencies scored in the fundable range. And we're beginning now to see that those are beginning to come to fruition. But if all of those are funded, it will add another $11 million to the research portfolio of THI. So congratulations to our scientists for continuing to push their science forward. And the Center for Clinical Research is also busy. This is a group that monitors and runs our clinical research initiatives that are going on. They today have almost 20 active trials with a staggering 26 that are in some form or fashion in startup phase. And certainly one of the interesting and important parts of THI's research portfolio is that almost everything that we're doing is intended to improve human health. And we are very interested in taking our research observations, translating them into humans, and trying to get them commercialized. And you can see that over the last 20 years, THI has spun off 17 companies that are returning important royalty payments back to THI to support other research initiatives. And science isn't supposed to be kept isolated. It's supposed to be disseminated. And I would just highlight for you that in 2022, our clinicians and our research teams have been very prolific, publishing 478 papers. 108 of those came from the research scientists and staff who were employed at THI, the others from the remainder of the professional staff, and 46 of those papers came from the employed clinical practice at THI. And I think that our research has caught national and international attention. For a little bit, it was hard to turn on the news without seeing Emerson Perrin and the story of DREAM-HF, but that story was picked up by CNN and USA Today and a variety of other news outlets. But there are news outlets that are beginning to come back to THI now to hear what it is we're doing in our laboratories, what are we doing in the clinical space that's interesting and innovative. And I think that this is just the start of a really important trend to reestablish THI as a thought leader on a national and international stage. And I want to just turn now to the education mission. This was a picture of one of the symposia that we did earlier this year. Everybody seems to be remarkably engaged, except Andrew here. I don't know if he's looking down or if he's asleep. And 75% of the internal medicine residents who want to be cardiologists apply to become a THI fellow. And I think Dr. Coulter and her team have done an incredible job at building a national and international reputation of excellence for cardiovascular education. We have begun to reach back out into those groups. You can see the number of people who have trained at THI. That's down in that box on the bottom left. And you can see where our fellows are going to go this year. These are the fellows who are finishing training this year. And you can see that some of them are staying for advanced training here at THI. Isabel's going to Los Angeles for an advanced heart failure fellowship, interventional fellowship, some of them going out and taking jobs. But I think that our fellows, the people who train here, leave here exquisitely trained. They're outstanding cardiologists and cardiovascular subspecialists, and they're getting excellent jobs. And I also wanted to highlight Matt for just a second, because I think Matt has done a remarkable job at finding a way to combine rigorous clinical training with scholarship. And Matt, this last year, was named as an AHA Samuel Levine Early Career Clinical Investigator. So congratulations, Matt, well deserved. And we'd like to continue recruiting fellows like you who are able to bridge that gap between clinical care and research. We also have the School of Perfusion Technology. We graduate 2 classes per year, and I didn't want to exclude them from recognition in this, but also an incredibly important training program that's filling the needs of cardiac ORs across the country. And you can see where our trainees in these programs are going. A lot of them staying in Texas, but some going out farther, including to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And I didn't want to stop without highlighting the professional staff, because I think the professional staff at THI does an incredible job at supporting our research and our education missions. And in conjunction with Dr. Perrin, we have put together a new program where we're going to ask the professional staff every couple of years, tell us a little bit about what you're doing to support the missions of THI. Tell us about how you're teaching. Tell us about what you're doing in research. How are you supporting cardiovascular care in the community? How are you serving the community? How are you serving the hospital? And how are you serving THI? The other thing that was important is this year, what we have decided is that this group of our colleagues and partners will have a specific designation. They'll be the Texas Heart Institute academic professional staff to signify their important contributions to our academic mission. And we've been able to get groups back together that we had to pause during COVID. The Cardiac Society has now gone back to starting up their face-to-face symposium in the fall. And the Cardiac Society has been very generous in supporting our training program. And for the first time in many years, the Cooley Hands Group got back together. These were surgeons that trained with Dr. Cooley and linked themselves back to THI through that surgical training. And we were honored to have this group of cardiac surgeons come back and join us last spring. The CME department is remarkably busy. We run a series of symposia through the year that are shown over on the right side of the slide, but we also, Carrie Sprung and her team have done a terrific job at archiving the work that we do so that it's available for view later. And we have a rich repository of enduring CME that can be viewed at a later time. And I just wanted to highlight, there have been more than 125,000 people who've watched the Cardiology Grand Rounds series this year. So it's not, there aren't that many people sitting in the audience today. So actually, and it's been fun to watch where questions are coming from because we're broadcasting these remotely, but it's not unusual to get questions from Europe and from Central and South America popping up. So it's really been a remarkable and robust year for CME at THI. The journal is also doing well. Under the leadership of Zvonko Krejcir, we have undertaken really a revamp of the journal. We've gotten rid of the backlog of papers that we had sitting. Zvonko has implemented a series of improvements in process so that papers are moving through more quickly. And we've just put together a new look for the journal. It's shown over here on the right side of the slide, but it's a very fresh, appealing looking journal now that looks very contemporary. And I would encourage all of you who are writing to submit papers to the THI journal. The other innovation that has occurred this year is really around the website. And I just want to highlight for you, in case you haven't spent much time on the THI website, there is a piece about the laboratories and about THI and our mission and the timeline and sort of the history of THI. But there's also an important component of that website that's very much public facing, and it's about education of cardiovascular conditions. The website has a shocking number of visits. Almost 9 million people clicked on the THI website in the past year, and we've had almost 50 million page views. But one of the really interesting things that we had committed to is we said, we think that we would like to translate the THI website into 2 more languages this year. And we had selected Chinese and Vietnamese to reflect the communities of Houston. But Carrie and her team and Howard Schramm were able to find a new AI-driven program that translated the THI website into 104 languages in 1 week. And I think that we did it for under $1,000, which is remarkable. And the interesting part about this program is it doesn't just translate word for word, but it translates phrases and it translates sentences so that you don't get that wonky, unusual kind of translation if you're just going word for word. So I would encourage you, if you are inclined, and especially if you speak any other languages, to get on the website. At the bottom on the left side, you can change the language and the whole website will convert over to a different language for you. What I've shown you here is in Italian, the web page for atrial fibrillation. And we've also been involved in getting back out into the community and supporting community health related issues. This is probably one of the more important ones that we've done this year through Fit Houston. There was an initiative to get Houston out walking. And we were one of the primary sponsors of this initiative and have been widely recognized for our commitment to cardiovascular health through simple walking in the Houston community. And I wanted to close with the efforts that we've made around development and what we're planning to do. So this year we hired Julie Voss as our Vice President for Development, and she is putting her development team back together. She has suggested and approved by the board that we put together a THI Research Innovation Fund. We're using some funds that we have to match large gifts, basically doubling their impact to support our research initiatives. We have been tireless in reconnecting with people who are longtime friends of THI and have been generous with their resources and with the foundations that have supported our research and education initiatives for the last several decades. And we also are planning on reinvigorating the THI Gala in the fall, and you'll hear more about this, but we'll certainly be looking to all of us for ways to connect us with vendors, and we'll be looking for volunteers to help us with the gala. So I'm once again honored to stand in front of you and tell you all of the amazing things that you've done this year. It's been a great year at THI. We've accomplished a lot, and I come in on Monday morning and pinch myself and think, wow, the things that we are all doing collectively really are driving us in the direction that we want to go. We were asked to reestablish THI on a national and international stage as a center and as an institute of excellence. And with THI and our hospital partners and then the professional staff, I believe that we're moving in that direction. The new facilities that we have are incredible. And I'm grateful to the board for supporting our vision for how to move this forward. The board has also been instrumental in approving capital expenditures to support our research labs. We are taking on some of the most interesting and difficult clinical cases, and we are solving problems that are unsolved in cardiovascular science and in cardiovascular medicine. And for that, I think the world says thank you to you. Our training programs are highly considered, and we're attracting outstanding young trainees and young scientists. And the impact of THI continues to grow. So I will stop there The year in review is available on the website if you're interested in taking deep dives into some of the programs that we talked about. And I happily would try to answer any questions that you have about the Heart Institute and what we're doing. Thank you very much.